Well, the ongoing investigations and actions against TD in the U.S. related to laundering of funds tied to the illegal drug trade have turned the spotlight on Canada's lack of equally aggressive action. Canada's anti-money laundering and terrorist financing regulations need an overhaul, according to a former special advisor to FINTRAC, Canada's supervising agency which monitors those crimes. Denis Meunier is president of Denis Meunier Consulting, and he joins us now. Thanks very much for your time this morning. First of all, how would you characterize the enforcement makeup here in Canada?
Well, you have to consider that the regulations that we have and the legislation that covers anti-money laundering in Canada hasn't been reviewed in terms of the penalties or the offenses for either 15 or 20 years, depending on whether they're administrative monetary penalties or offenses. So I think with the upcoming parliamentary review of the Act, Anti-Money Laundering Act, I think it's time that Parliament and government take a look at upgrading those fines. I would also add that FINTRAC is limited in what it can do by the legislation in terms of fines. Really, they're penalties is what we call them. And basically, those penalties are set to encourage compliance. So what I think is missing is the next portion is very significant penalties or fines, if you wish, gross negligence penalties that basically are there to punish when there is a significant deficiency or violation of the Act. And I think that's where the next step should be in terms of enforcement, in terms of the compliance regulatory framework.
And how important is just an update on the penalties simply when you've got Canadian banks that have large operations in the U.S. and you have enforcement teams there that are ready to impose large penalties?
Well, of course, what's happened in the U.S. is very different than what's happened in Canada. And based on what I understand, you're looking at, in the U.S., you're looking at people who pled guilty for money laundering as well as facilitating through the bank over $600 million over a period of 4 years. So that's very significant. Whereas when you compare what's happened to Canada, and certainly not just TD, but RBC, CIBC, Laurentian over the last 2 years, is these are violations of the Act, which in most cases involves the fact that failure to send suspicious transaction reports, but there's no connection to the bank systematically being involved in money laundering. So that's a big difference, comparing apples and oranges between both. And of course, FINTRAC isn't concerned, doesn't have the responsibility to oversee what's going on with the U.S. Banking system.
What about the vulnerabilities in Canada, some of the biggest threats that you see just based on the way we enforce right now?
Well, actually, the financial there was an inherent risk assessment done a while back, and that risk assessment basically identified financial institutions and money services businesses as being at the very high risk level, if you wish, inherent risk level. So it's incumbent upon those reporting entities to implement mitigating measures that will reduce that risk. And in terms of the way we enforce it, I would suggest that there be a commensurate approach in terms of enforcement, that the higher risk you are, therefore, the higher penalties or the higher remedial actions a supervisor should take, as well as something that would be identified if you're really egregious and it becomes an offense, potentially investigated by police for criminal purposes, then the higher risk you are as an entity, the higher the penalties or these consequences, either in the criminal code or in the PCM-LTFA, which is the act that covers anti-money laundering. So everything has to be balanced with risk. So the higher the risk, the higher the penalty.
And are there higher compliance realities ahead, do you think, for Canadian banks?
I think actually what's happened both in the US and particularly in Canada with respect to financial institutions, as well as all reporting entities, is that FINTRAC has taken a much stricter approach over the last couple of years, and I congratulate them for doing that. But I think it sends a wake-up call throughout all sectors that the supervisor, FINTRAC, is basically taking off the kid gloves. I admit that I think the penalties should be higher in all cases, given a new framework that I think should be revised by government. However, I think that is going to send a good message of ensuring a higher level of scrutiny by all financial institutions and reporting entities in terms of their AML regimes. I have to say, though, that without the banks, without the financial institutions, they have been cooperating over the last 20 years in providing a lot of financial intelligence to FINTRAC. So there's that side that you have to recognize that they have invested a lot of money over time to protect the financial system. But at the same time, they always have to adapt to the new threats that are coming forward, whether it's crypto or changes in geopolitical events, money from Russia or China or whatever. Those are the kinds of things that they really need to be aware of and adapt continually. So it means more money to invest in their systems, but we all know what the consequence is if you're not keeping up to date with protecting your bank from being abused by money launderers.